Not every great artist gets to witness the impact of their own work. Some spend their entire lives chasing recognition, only to be forgotten the moment they are gone. Others become legends decades after their deaths, when the world finally catches up with their art. Few musicians embody that tragedy more completely than British singer-songwriter Nick Drake. Today his albums are considered landmarks of British folk music. His songs have appeared in films, television series, and commercials. Countless musicians, from R.E.M. and The Cure to Elliott Smith and Norah Jones, have cited him as an inspiration. But during his lifetime, almost nobody listened to his songs. Nick Drake died at just 26 years old, believing he had failed. This is the Lester Beer YouTube channel, where I tell stories about music and the people behind it. Today's story is a bit sad, but ultimately it's one of hope. Thank you for watching. He was born on June 19, 1948, into a wealthy English family that encouraged creativity. His father, Rodney Drake, worked as an engineer and businessman in an import-export trade, while his mother, Molly, was a gifted songwriter who composed melodies for the family to enjoy at home. His older sister, Gabrielle, would later become a successful television actress. Music surrounded Nick from childhood. He learned to play the piano before moving on to the clarinet and saxophone. At Marlborough College, one of England's most prestigious boarding schools, he formed his first band, the Perfumed Gardeners, performing jazz standards and contemporary songs. Yet it wasn't until he discovered the acoustic guitar that music became more than a hobby. Drake quickly developed a distinctive fingerpicking style, blending influences from British folk, jazz, blues, and classical music. He focused on creating quiet and intimate songs. In 1967, he enrolled at Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge, to study English literature, but lectures increasingly took a back seat to songwriting. Drake immersed himself in the works of Arthur Rimbaud, Albert Camus, William Blake, and Fyodor Dostoevsky, authors whose themes of beauty, loneliness, and existential uncertainty would echo throughout his lyrics. Around the same time, he began traveling across Europe and Morocco, often hitchhiking with friends. The journeys exposed him to new cultures and ideas, and like many young people of the era, he experimented with drugs. While these journeys broadened his experience, friends later suggested they may also have contributed to the growing emotional distance that would define much of his life. Despite having a circle of friends, Nick Drake remained profoundly private. Few people ever felt they truly knew him. He disliked explaining his songs, rarely spoke about his emotions, and often retreated into solitude for hours at a time. When inspiration struck, he would lock himself in his bedroom, draw the curtains, turn out the lights, and spend the night writing music in near darkness. His remarkable talents soon caught the attention of fellow musician Ashley Hutchings, founder of the influential folk rock group Fairport Convention. Hutchings introduced Drake to producer Joe Boyd, one of the most respected figures in the British folk scene. Boyd immediately sensed that he was hearing someone extraordinary. Boyd offered him a recording contract before Drake had even finished university. Instead of completing his degree, Drake made a life-changing decision. He left Cambridge to pursue music full-time. In 1969, he released his debut album, 5 Lives Left. The record combined delicate acoustic guitar, Drake's soft melancholic voice, and elegant string arrangements by composer Robert Kirby, one of his closest friends. The album's unusual title came from an unexpected source. At the time, Rizla rolling paper packets included a small message that appeared as the paper ran out. With only a few sheets remaining, smokers would read the words, 5 Lives Left. Years later, many fans couldn't help noticing the eerie coincidence. From the album's release in 1969, Nick Drake had only 5 years left to live. Lyrically, 5 Lives Left explored longing, childhood memories, loneliness, and the quiet passage of time. One song, however, would prove especially prophetic. In Fruit Tree, Drake reflected on the strange relationship between art, fame, and mortality.
Fame is but a fruit tree, so very unsown.
The song's message was painfully clear. Recognition often arrives only after the artist is gone. At the time, however, almost no one seemed to notice. Despite enthusiastic reviews from some critics, Five Leaves Left sold only a few thousand copies. The public largely ignored it, and Drake, who had abandoned university in pursuit of music, was left wondering whether he had made the right decision. For his second album, Brighter or Later, Joe Boyd hoped to reach a wider audience without sacrificing what made Nick Drake unique. The intimate sound of Five Leaves Left gave way to a richer, more ambitious production. Jazz musicians, session players, and members of Fairport Convention contributed to the recordings. Richard Thompson added electric guitar, while arranger Robert Kirby returned with lush orchestral arrangements. Island Records believed they finally had an album that could introduce Drake to a much larger audience. Released in 1970, Brighter Later became an even greater commercial disappointment than Drake's debut. It sold only a few thousand copies, and despite glowing praise from a handful of critics, the record failed to find an audience. The failure hit Drake hard. Like many young musicians, he wanted people to hear his songs, to know that his music mattered. Instead, he watched album after album disappear into record store shelves unnoticed by the public. Live performances offered little comfort. Drake was painfully shy on stage. He rarely addressed the audience, often kept his eyes fixed on the floor, and sometimes left without saying a single word after finishing his set. His quiet personality contrasted sharply with an era dominated by rock stars. Some concerts ended after only a few songs. At one performance, Drake reportedly walked off the stage in the middle of the set without explanation. Whether it was stage fright or depression, even those closest to him struggled to understand what he was experiencing.
I never saw moons, knew the meaning of the sea.
Around the same time, Joe Boyd moved to the United States, ending the close creative partnership that had shaped Drake's first two albums. Without his strongest supporter at Island Records, Drake felt disconnected from the music industry. His withdrawal from the outside world became impossible to ignore. Friends noticed that conversations grew shorter. Sometimes he would sit silently for hours, staring into space, seemingly unaware of the people around him. The cheerful, curious young man they had once known seemed to be disappearing. Doctors eventually diagnosed Drake with clinical depression. Although mental health was still poorly understood in the early 1970s and the treatment was inconsistent. Friends also worried about his heavy cannabis use, believing it deepened his isolation rather than easing it. Yet in the middle of this personal collapse, Drake created the album that would define his legacy. In late 1971, he contacted Island Records with a surprising request. He wanted to record a new album immediately, but this time he wanted complete creative control. The sessions took place over just 2 nights in October 1971. Unlike the production of Brighter Later, Drake stripped everything away. There would be almost no arrangements, no backing musicians, and almost no overdubs. Just his voice, his acoustic guitar, and on the title track, a brief piano part. The resulting album, Pink Moon, lasts just 28 minutes. There are no grand statements or dramatic climaxes. Drake sings with extraordinary restraint, allowing silence to become as important as the notes themselves. Every guitar pattern, every pause between lyrics seems to invite the listener into an intensely private world. When Drake arrived at the studio, engineer John Wood barely recognized him. His hair had grown long and unkempt, he had lost weight and appeared exhausted. During the sessions, he spoke very little, recording take after take with quiet determination before packing up his guitar and leaving almost as suddenly as he had arrived. After delivering the finished master tapes, Drake reportedly left them at Island Records without waiting for a meeting. When Pink Moon was released in early 1972, history repeated itself. Critics admired its beauty, but sales were even lower than before. The album barely made an impression outside a small circle of devoted listeners. For Nick Drake, it was another devastating confirmation that the audience he had spent years searching for simply didn't exist. He stopped performing almost entirely and wrote very little new material. The last years of Nick Drake's life unfolded in near silence.
It was pleasant, and it's extremely pleasant sitting here now because I think there's something extraordinarily nice about seeing the dawn up before one goes to bed, because there's something uncanny about it when it suddenly becomes light, because one connects darkness with going to bed, surely, and when one is still up it becomes light, and it's a new day and you still haven't gone to bed to sleep, because the night equals sleep so easily. And when one is still up when the new day begins, it is something of an intriguing experience, I always find. I can look out the window now and that tree over there is green. Whereas before one goes to bed, just before one goes to bed, a tree should be black, surely. Everything should be black before one goes to bed. That is surely the essence of the whole matter.
When I was younger than before.
Unable to find success in the music industry and increasingly overwhelmed by depression, he drifted between periods of isolation and brief attempts to start over. Sometimes he would borrow his mother's car and drive for hours with no destination in mind, only stopping when the fuel tank was empty. He would then call his parents and ask them to come pick him up. For a time he lived on an abandoned farm in rural France, hoping that distance from England might bring him peace. Around the same period, the celebrated French singer François Hardy expressed an interest in recording his songs, but even that recognition failed to change the course of his life. As his depression deepened, Drake was admitted to a hospital, where he spent several weeks receiving treatment. Friends and family hoped he would recover, but the illness continued to cast a long shadow over his life. Eventually, he returned to his parents' home, a large stone house where he had spent much of his childhood. It was there, on the night of November 24, 1974, that Nick Drake died from an overdose. He was just 26 years old. Whether his death was intentional has never been conclusively established. No suicide note was ever found. Some of those closest to Drake believed he had taken his medication accidentally. More than 50 years later, the truth remains unknown. One detail, however, has become part of the story surrounding his final days. Near his bed lay Albert Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, a work that explores one of humanity's oldest and most difficult questions. It opens with words that have become some of the most famous in modern philosophy. There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether life is or is not worth living amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. His conclusion is that life should be embraced despite its apparent absurdity, that meaning is not something we discover, but something we create. Whether Drake had reached the same conclusion, no one can say. His story might have ended there, a gifted songwriter remembered only by family and a handful of devoted fans. Throughout the 1980s, musicians began rediscovering his records. Artists such as R.E.M, The Cure, Kate Bush, and later Elliott Smith spoke openly about Drake's influence on their own music. In 1987, Joe Boyd, the producer who had first recognized Drake's talent, released Time of No Reply, a collection of previously unreleased recordings. It introduced another generation of listeners to a songwriter who had almost vanished from history. Then in 1999, Volkswagen used Drake's song Pink Moon in a television commercial. The ad reached millions of viewers, many of whom immediately wanted to know who the mysterious singer was. Almost overnight, sales of Pink Moon soared. For the first time, people began discovering Nick Drake. His music soon appeared in films and television, including The Royal Tenenbaums and Garden State. Critics revisited his entire catalog, placing Five Leaves Left, Brighter Later, and Pink Moon among the finest folk albums ever recorded. The recognition Drake had spent his life searching for had finally arrived. He just wasn't there to see it. Friends often remembered finding Drake sitting alone in his room for hours, motionless, staring blankly at the wall. On one occasion, a visitor recalled that he seemed completely numb, lost in thought, almost unreachable, as if the outside world had faded away. And no one could truly know what was happening inside his mind during those silent moments. So, Nick Drake's story is full of sadness, and his music isn't exactly cheerful either. But in the end, people finally got the chance to hear him and truly understand him. To me, that's the most meaningful part of his story. And if you'd like to watch more videos about music and film, subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also find me on TikTok and Instagram. See you soon.